Now, I know those girls suffered, and I know those girls absolutely were sex trafficked, right? And they deserve every empathy. It's awful. But why have they focused so heavily on this island and more the glamour of what they got up to? And, oh, yeah, they were abused too. But look at this amazing island, and look at these cars, and look at these, well, they were abused too. And look at them in the bikinis by the pool and having a great time. They were abused too. It's very quiet for me, the bit about the abuse. It's very much focused on, look at this incredible wealth and what they were getting up to whilst they were also abused. Like, that to me whitewashes abuse.
You're on podcasts with me, John Lebbon, Anthony Ellis, and today's special guest, Emma Kenny, or TV's Emma Kenny.
But right now, at least.
You've got a better studio in your house than most people have like at Media City or something like that.
I know, but if it was me, just me, I'd just be sat with my iPhone in the dark most of the time. It's my husband who does all of it. So it's a good setup, but nothing to do with me.
No.
And what we didn't realise when doing a little bit of research was your crime background.
Yeah.
Like murdering your family.
Armed robbery. The general burglaries, obviously, of course.
She's served porridge. She's done a bit of porridge.
Because I knew from this morning and with the COVID thing and stuff like that, I didn't know murdering your family and things like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't realise how many women are into that sort of subject. And
it's the biggest area for women, both writing and reading and actually watching. So, yeah, we love it.
So what age were you like 40 and everyone else had like Beckham on the wall? You had like Ted Bundy, or
obviously,
is it just one of them?
I had a range of serial killers that I had as poster boys in my room. So I've always been completely transfixed by victimology, so the impact of crime. So because I work with people who are victims of trauma and also people who have been at risk of horrible things happening to them throughout their lives, you kind of get to know about what happens to victims, and through that you start getting interesting in, what is it that makes a killer? What is it that takes that individual who, to all intents and purposes, like Nielsen or Dahmer, realistically, you can't see why it was so catastrophic that they'd end up doing something like they did. But then you look at somebody with an equally similar set of circumstances who become a barrister. It's like, what is the ingredient that takes an individual from being a normal human being to being somebody who tortures and murders and kills? So I think I've always wanted to know, what is the alter of who I am? Like, all I want to do is heal. What's it like to do the opposite? What's it like to want to do the opposite?
Because the one on Netflix at the minute, Chris Watts, that we watched at the weekend, like that.
The American Murderer.
He seemed like
He's
the normal
one
guy.
That's a bit of an anomaly, isn't he?
No head injuries, no childhood abuse and things like that. Nothing leading up to that. How can you explain something like that? Or is that just some guy that just snapped?
Well, it's interesting because Chris Watts is the one that they're really kind of researching, and he's very willing to kind of engage and talk to people about it. So when the police officers who initially arrested him, and they definitely at the beginning didn't think that they were dealing with the person who'd murdered his children, particularly 3 children, unborn baby and 2 girls. But then when he actually confessed and they gave him that opportunity during, it's very clever what they do, but I always think, I've watched so many interviews, I'd know what the police are trying to do. But, when they kind of give him a reason,
Dead spot on and that taps on the back and stuff like that.
Was it just that she'd done, you couldn't help yourself? And then it turned out, then I just happened to strangle him. And I thought, the kids, they'll be miles more upset if their mum's dead. I'll kill them. That kind of mentality. But he doesn't really fit, when you look at his experience in life, any of those kind of boxes that you'd have expected. But that doesn't mean that he isn't. It just means that he's better at masking, doesn't it? That's the reality.
Well, like when I was watching that, I watched it with my wife the other day, and I thought, is it a case that given the right circumstances and under the right stress, anybody could do what he did? Or is it a case of, as you say, it's always been in there, bubbled under the surface, and it just took that, it was the straw that broke the camel's back? And because you're watching, you're going, I honestly don't see like what could drive me personally, or like knowing you for that. I don't see what could drive you to that. So it's like, it's that question where you go, well, is he like, he done an evil act? Does that mean he's an evil person? Or like, do you know what I mean? Like so I can't figure it out. Like,
I think it makes him a psychopath. I think that it means that he's somebody who can make choices to protect himself over what he wishes to protect family-wise. So in the critical moment, he made a choice, whether that's in the moment of killing. He decided that he didn't want to carry on the life that he was living. So he essentially extinguished it. Yeah. But then to have time to reflect and to then go on and do what he did to his children, well, that's a different level. Because arguably, in the moment where you kill somebody in a rage of passion, you have a moment to take a step back and think, I'm going to have to tell the police I've done this. You know, at that point, it's not forgivable, it's not excusable, but you can kind of understand that rage or these aggressive acts happen occasionally. And if he then called the police and said, I've done this terrible thing, I can't believe it. But he then killed 3 other children in that experience. So I think at that point, yeah, the callousness and the lack of empathy and the willingness to achieve something for himself that he wished to have, which in this moment probably was an affair with the other woman, a new life, all the things, to see it that black and white, well, I'll just eradicate everything here so that I can have everything there. You don't get more psychopathic than get, really. And the idea that a psychopath can't be attractive, can't be successful, can't have relationships is a myth. It just means that the way that they'll be within those relationships might not be as authentic as they may present themselves to be. And I don't think anybody and everybody can kill. I think in certain situations, people will kill. So if I were in a situation now where somebody walked into this room and had a gun and threatened your lives, and I could get that gun off them and shoot them to protect you, there is a strong inclination, I believe, within me to do that. That would not be me wanting to kill. That would absolutely be me wanting to protect. So I think that a lot of us instinctually, if you ask any mother, what would you do if somebody sexually molested your child? Pretty much 99% will say, I'd want them dead. And they would in that moment. And if in that moment they had a chance to do it, they would do it. Again, it's not that they're killers, it's that they're protectors. And there's a visceral and cerebral reaction for protection within, I think, every human. Whereas I think psychopaths, the only protection that they have is to themselves.
Because a lot of psychopaths that run top companies, don't they? They have the same traits and things like that.
1 in 100.
Yeah. So it's like a fine line that people don't realise. And I don't know, it's just a bizarre, because I think everyone associates a psychopath with like a Chris Watts type, don't they?
Yes.
They don't realise like, oh, it could be the guy that's running that local CEO of a company and things like that, because they've all got different traits. And I don't know. But the Chris Watts one, I think it's because it's all on camera. We're fascinated with that one.
And also, he just looks like a guy you'd want to go to the bar with, right? You know, he's a good guy, hey? He's the kind of guy that's all American. He's the kind of guy that you'd want marrying your daughter. And then if you have that conversation in your head, and then you think, oh my God, what does that mean about people I have in my life? You know, can you ultimately ever trust anybody? Or is there always that tiny possibility that one day I might end up in a similar situation? I think that's what makes crime so addictive, because you're desperately trying to reach into an area of the world, of the mind, of the psyche, of all the things that go around that. You're trying to reach in, but you can never quite understand it. And it kind of is equally as repulsive and reprehensible as it is interesting and evocative and provocative. When somebody like Chris Watts is put in front of you, or American poster boy in so many ways, then it makes you question everything you fundamentally think about other human beings and potential, which is a good thing, because our problem is we don't. You know, one of the big problems that we have with, let's say right now, domestic violence crimes have risen dramatically during COVID, and the rate of domestic homicide has gone from 3 a week to 5 a week. So there are women, particularly women, it's a gendered crime on the whole. Men definitely suffer from domestic abuse, but it's a gendered crime on the whole. They're being murdered by their partners. We should always question a little bit more, shouldn't we?
Well, it's weird because you go around people's houses and Netflix, it's a suggested playlist. It looks like people are apprentice serial killers. And I think that just shows you like how interested we are. And you say about the way Chris looks, I think that's why people are fascinated with Ted Bundy.
Yes.
Because we think someone like Ted Bundy should be in a rain jacket, eyes up here, look like a monster, where he just looks like a normal guy. They always say he's good looking, but I think that's just been...
It's just not as ugly as a lot of the serial killers.
I think the bar's so low. Like people make out...
Richard Ramirez, who was the Night Stalker serial killer, was grotesquely unattractive, really. I mean, his teeth were decayed and he smelt very badly, but he had that hair and he was tall and he had those eyes, so people thought he was somebody attractive. Charles Manson, I mean, there was nothing particularly attractive about him. David Koresh, you know, when you think about a cult killing, very enigmatic and charismatic and interesting, but looks-wise, not quite as ugly as what you'd expect for somebody who's a mass killer. And the thing about human nature is that we're born with this innate belief system that what looks good must be good. Yeah. If you show a baby a pretty human, smiling versus an unattractive human smiling, the pretty human gets the better reaction. If you look at an apple and one is a bit bruised and one is bright red, the fact that the bright red one is really shiny and probably made with really inappropriate hydroponics compared to the one that's just been grown on a tree, you'll just automatically reach for the bright red one that's all shiny. Might not be good for you, but it looks good, so it must be good. And that's the mistake fundamentally that humans make all the time. That's why attractive people get a lot further, even though a lot of the time they don't have to be very clever.
Right, because it's just a bizarre, because Ted Bundy, I don't know how many years ago it is, but it's still on now. Like, I think the last programme that I watched was his girlfriend, and she was talking about, I had suspicions. I thought, you had suspicions? They're looking for someone who looks like your husband.
Yeah, drives a car like your husband.
He's got a ski mask. That
that's
he takes his knife out with him everywhere.
Seems to have some strange sexual predilections, but...
Yeah. Well, in terms of the cycle, like, so are you of the belief that is it nature or nurture? Like,
Oh, that's the one that we'll never know until brain scans show us more. Right. We are realizing, according to science, that when you look at a brain of a serial killer or a psychopath or somebody who's murdered, there tends to be an area of the brain which is the amygdala, which looks different than it does on brain scans of people who aren't. And that would therefore show you that potentially the brain is functionally part of why somebody makes those choices. The hard bit is, of course, how many people out there have an amygdala the same who isn't doing that? Yeah. So it's more about, like, if we were to look at brain scans, it would be around finding other ones that were similar, that maybe the murderers hadn't happened, but that maybe their lives had shown criminal behaviours or low empathy or things like that. So it wouldn't necessarily...
multivariable thing.
So then you can look at an ingredients list. Yeah. So, okay, I'm born with this predisposition, then I have this ingredients list of activity, which is, I get abused by my parents. Because I think that people don't like talking about crime and criminals as victims, but a lot of criminals are really, really high-level victims. I mean, they think about 70% of men have been sexually abused who are in prison. So you're automatically looking at a group of individuals who've been marginalised, usually from poor environments, very often domestically abused. These are individuals that we really should find sympathy and empathy for at points in their lives, and they're failed. And then behaviours, according to their behaviour in crime, escalate and they end up locked up, and then everyone says that they're bad. And I get that, because, we like justice, but we often don't see the injustice causing it. But I think when you look at a lot of the serial killers' lives, it's not necessitated that they've had really awful times, not any different than other people who've gone on to be completely okay human beings. So I think that you might get born with a predisposition, or, as you said, head injuries. Fred West is a classic example. He had 2 really serious head injuries. And a lot of them actually have had head injuries as kids. But then a lot of kids have head injuries. But then you get a parent who's particularly forgiving of you or very abusive of you. And then you add to that, you're bullied at school and people don't like you. Maybe you get rejected sexually at an early age, and so on and so forth. And it's that ingredients list that makes that catch and call, I suppose, regarding whether you are somebody who could become one. But I don't think it's not potentially a predisposition that's really, really early on as inborn. I think it probably is. I think when I say, and again, this is completely me, so don't quote me as being some kind of mass scientist unraveling something new and that I've suddenly come up with this theory. It just makes sense to me. But often things that make sense to me don't make sense to other people. So I'm just going to say that. And this is not to say that I forgive psychopaths in any way, shape or form, because in America, they're doing things like biofeedback with people who are on the psychopathic scale, and it's working really well. They're doing compassion training and it's working really well. So we're showing that you can have all these traits as a young person, particularly under 25, and then you can get all this training and actually we can turn you away from that path. And as long as you don't drink heavily or take loads of drugs, you should be able to stay on that path, because that impairs judgment and stuff. So there is definitely models that can show that they can change. But let's just take it that they're born. If you think about forever until recently, they were pretty helpful, weren't they? I mean, if I'd have been a king, I'd definitely have wanted a few psychopaths. Like, I'd have wanted to keep them really comfortable. I'd have wanted to make them feel very superior. And then I'd wanted them to go out and kill whoever I wanted without any conscience. I wouldn't want them falling apart. I'd hate for them to be emotionally invested. I just need them to go and do the jobs that they need to do. And whatever those jobs are, clear it up, get on with it, I'll pay you well. But that meant that nature had a purpose for them, right? Because that's what was required. Massive battles, all these things that would use a psychopath well. And if I happen to be somebody who liked torturing people, because my king told me I should torture people, there were perfect jobs where I could really enjoy it. So I wasn't going to be affected nature-wise because it was actually my job. No one was even going to have a go at me. I'd go home to my wife and my kids and how good day at the office? Well, yeah, tortured a few people. It's intensely interesting for me and exciting. Your wife's not going to be like, oh, that's a bit weird. She'd be like, well done, you've got your wage. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But evolution takes time to catch up. So our society has shifted and changed and become altruistic and much more moral, in the UK at least. I mean, there are places like death camps in other countries. There are places where this is still used and psychopaths are still helpful. But we've kind of bred out the use for a psychopath. And hopefully in the end, I suppose evolution will breed that out in time. But I think right now they'll pop up, you know.
Social media, it's weird, isn't it? You see some people comment and you think, there's something wrong with you, isn't it? And that you watch like Gladiator and that where the crowd would determine who's going to die in the middle.
Yes.
Think, I wonder who could do that. And you look at social media,
Twitter.
Think, I could see how that would happen because everyone's like, oh, deplatform them, then they kicked out the house. They're fat. You know, you think, why? Just because they said something out of turn? Like,
yeah.
I remember growing up, if you said something wrong, you'd apologise.
Yeah.
We'd all just get on with it.
Exactly.
That isn't possible anymore now.
No.
Yeah. If you dunk, you might say something out of line, you might write something. Whereas now it's just that one chance, then you're gone, isn't it? And it's not a very...
Cancel culture is a terrible culture.
Yeah, it's just not a very forgiving society that we live in at the moment.
You can't grow.
Yeah. Because everyone makes mistakes. You look back and think, I shouldn't have done that. And if you're just going to get... Especially like people like yourself who are in the public eye, you make one slip and everyone's just on you.
Yeah, but see, here's my problem with that. Like that's exacerbated by the fact that because people feel the need to apologise. If the people who were asked to apologise, who people try and cancel, all got together and went, no, I'm not going to apologise. Like I've not inflamed people. I've not inflamed a riot. I've not told people to go out and murder or kill or rape. This is my opinion, and you're taking it out of context, which it has to. Because that's the biggest one when you take something out of context. Like that's the worst one at the moment.
Like me today getting accused of eugenics.
I'm
getting told to go and hang myself in a field.
Yeah, like, so the stuff that you're getting there, obviously, like, if they're taking it out of context what you've actually put, then what, like, you don't apologise for it. You go, no, this is my opinion, I'm sticking to it. But when people turn around and come out and say, I'm really, really sorry about this, I'm really sorry about this, all you're doing is you're just empowering the cancel culture, like the people who are running that. So it doesn't help it in the long run.
Yeah, I don't do that. I'll just be like, by the way, I didn't mean that I was going to kill old people. I think COVID collateral needs to be explored. I won't say I'm sorry because it would be denying my position, which is that right now COVID is causing collateral damage beyond belief. And if we don't start saying things about it, then the results are going to be catastrophic. Stillbirth's gone up all over the world, even in the UK. Child poverty already was terrible in the UK. It's going to go through the roof. Unemployment's going to cause suicide. Poverty is going to cause suicide. Poverty causes disease. Disease is not being treated elsewhere because COVID is the only disease that we're allowed to talk about. And if we dare to say that COVID isn't the only one, then apparently we get shouted at and apparently we get told to be quiet. So my dad taught me that if I was ever really scared of saying stuff, then I had to say it lots more because it would always be the right thing. Because you don't feel afraid of saying the easy thing. So I spent my life doing that. And it's an interesting one because I'm so Z-list. I really have no care or concern about the media. If the media cancel me, I carry on exactly the same. I've never built my world around the media. I'd miss this morning because I think that I do a lot of crime, which I'll never get cancelled over. The more weird I can be, the better for crime, because crime and production of crime is not about whether you're popular. It's about whether you can talk about it and make sense and be logical and be a little bit willing to put yourself on the line with your perspectives. But this morning, for example, is very much ruled by things like cancel culture. And I think they're very brave letting me be on at the moment because they've had a lot of people try to get me taken off and I've been dropped elsewhere. And the thing is, at that point, you always have to make a call as a human being and you say, well, I lost that show, which I loved, but does that matter more than truth and integrity? And the day that that matters more than truth and integrity, I have to stop doing that. So being dropped is important because if I then decided to pursue it, that would make me a really terrible human, a really dangerous human. And there are too many dangerous humans with blue ticks.
Well, it's one of them, isn't it? I don't see the problem with just questioning stuff. All you're asking is quite. It's like if I say, like, look at Sweden, they're back to sort of normal.
Sweden is back to normal.
Why don't we copy them? Oh, how dare you say that? They're doing worse than
Sweden
Norway.
have been helpful for so many reasons.
Yeah.
Sweden have given us probably one of the most amazing studies that we can explore. Like, they did masks in certain places, they did masks in no places elsewhere. Sorry, they did no masks in other places, and the consequences, we now know masks have no meaning. So we actually have
knew
evidence.
that from the start. That's why
we all knew that from the start. Yeah. But the point is, they actually managed to just unknowingly, really, give us these amazing insights to the way that worked. And I never have felt happy about any Trump updates apart from the one where he was getting better. And I just thought, oh God, please get better. Because Trump, he's rich. So he doesn't buy into the gates and all that. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I have to say that because now whenever we question things and we bring in something like Gates, who is basically, I'm sure thinks he's a very nice person. I do believe that. He's also a monopolizer, which is why he was fined ridiculous amounts of money and told to back the fuck off from Microsoft when Microsoft was massive, from monopolizing the web. He's not somebody who knows how to have conversations with other people about how to do things. It's his way. So whenever somebody is a good person and they think they're a great person and they think that their ideas are great, it really doesn't matter whether your ideas are greater, because I'm great and I've got the monopoly. And when we monopolize anything, we have huge problems. And Trump won't be monopolized that way because he's more interested in his own personality and ego. So that means that when he comes out and says, I know COVID, I've got better than COVID ever. I'm the best person to ever have got past COVID. COVID is easy. I got better than everybody else in the whole world. You can too. He just won't be able to help himself. Yeah. So he just won't, his ego will be so powerfully motivated by this that he'll be like, open the world, And even though a bit of me is like, people will be like, you've killed 200,000 people in America. And it's like, well, actually, has he? Where's the evidence for this that he's killed 200,000 people in America? Were they really not going to die?
Yeah.
Because I've seen the statistics, and if you didn't think you were going to die, sometimes in your 90s, we need to have a conversation about death.
Well, I seen Joe Biden, he said something like, because I feel sorry for Joe Biden. He should be watching telly with Werther's Originals, just with his nieces and that running around. The poor guy gets pushed out, he gets all the dates wrong, stuff like that. 200 million are going to die before the end of this speech of COVID. You're like, are they, Joe? And then he said, if we wear masks before Christmas, we'll save 100,000 lives. 100,000 lives. Where are you getting this from, Joe? You know what I mean? Like, I do, honestly, I wouldn't say he's a bad person. I just feel sorry for him. It just reminds me of that fella in Co-op that doesn't know where the food is.
Yeah.
And you're like, come on, son. Yeah, like that. But I'm not saying I'm a Trump supporter, but you've got against Biden and you think, are these the two best in America? And you've just got to think, probably not. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's interesting in America, though, because I always have thought in America, presidents, Obama was pretty amazing, but then Obama was black. So in America, you have to be really good at something to make it as a black person. And we don't like talking about that. But you just have to see comedians and actors. Like, I went and saw Tenet, and Denzel Washington's son is just formidable. And he would have made it as a black actor or whatever, whether he'd had Denzel as his father or otherwise. But actually, when you see a lot of the comedians who've come up and a lot of the artists who've come up, they've come from nothing. And they're faultless when you see their art. And it's because they've had to fight at every single juncture in America to get where they need to be, because it's harder as a black person in America. I'm not saying it's not harder in the UK. It will be. I think we're better in the UK at equality. We're certainly not faultless, and we certainly need to work on it. But Obama kind of resonated as a great orator, and he knew his stuff, and he had this amazing family that were like very united, and he presented the idea that there was a better America, if that made sense. Not a great America, but a better America to be had. And I'm sure that he had things that he did wrong, like we all have things in our situations of leadership where we get them wrong. But I didn't think he had the same manipulation behind him as others. And I do think that America usually has people behind the scenes who are powerful, manipulating. But I didn't think we were like that in the UK. And then this has happened, and I think we are definitely like that in the UK. This is about manipulation, and it's about manipulation of figures, it's about manipulation of politics, it's about manipulation of money and what that money is going to be paid for and done for and given to. You know, all of those things are real. We can see it, but it's almost like people don't want to believe it. And I think that I've had this really awakening experience recently where I'm like, I just thought that the government wanted to protect me. And I know that sounds naive because people will always say, look, the government never really wanted to protect you. But I did. I just thought, okay, they might be a bit money orientated and they might care about money a lot and they might want the nice middle class homes, but they definitely went into politics to care for me. That was my belief. And I do think that a lot of politicians do, but that's not what's happening. So now I'm suddenly sitting there going, I feel like a political nomad because I've been a Labour supporter all my life and I will not vote next time for either. Because Keir has just used this as an opportunity to try to win seats and make himself seem that he can just beat up Tories. No, deunited instead. What are we doing? If
he wanted to win the next election, he could do it in a day, couldn't he? He could just come out saying, we need to get back going, we need to get cancers and things like that going. But he hasn't, as in, I'm a bit like you think you could have, I think if Corbyn was still leader, he'd have maybe been a bit more like, well, what are we doing here?
But he would have also liked the socialism of like paying people to stay at home. But I don't think he'd have been okay paying some people at home, but not loads of others. So creative industries are on their arse. Pubs are on their arse. Hospitality's just gone under. Cineworld's just gone under. People who are sat at home now furloughed might be enjoying it, but they're not going to in a few weeks when they find out they're not going to get paid and they haven't got a job. Like, I can't get past the short-sightedness versus the long-sightedness. What you were saying about Twitter before, that's a classic example of short-sightedness versus long-sightedness. So I say that I think that an 81-year-old deserves less life than a child. How is that inflammatory? Do I say kill the old person? No. Do I suggest that old person's life hasn't got worse? No. Do I believe they deserve less life than a child? Well, they're 80. I bloody hope so. When did that position become a position of inflammation? I don't connect with it.
It's a weird argument now because if you go slightly against COVID, it's like you've just gone out with a machine gun. You're going in old folks' homes. You know what I mean? Like it's more of a it's like if you had a serial killer running loose in Manchester and they dropped a nuclear bomb and said, we've got rid of that serial killer. You're like, yeah, but there's a lot of other damage you cause there. And that's a similar sort of analogy.
Is so
what we're
true.
doing. Do you know what I mean? Like you are getting rid of the problem, but you're causing more problems around it. And
that's right.
It just them conversations should be having in Parliament. How we could do it better. You look at like Taiwan, they've done track and trace better than us. Go and copy their system. Sweden, integrating normality, like learn off other countries, not just like we're the worst on the planet, aren't we? Like if you look at the figures, then people who run it, you just get sacked. If you're a wagon driver and you just get crashing every time, you get sacked. Whereas in government, it just seems to be, you can be terrible no matter how many times, and we'll just keep going.
You break the rules, you can do whatever you want, just like knock yourself out, you can do whatever you want, it's fine. There's a club that protects you. But I think your analogies are really good, and that's exactly it. That's the us and them. But then never in the UK has it felt more us and them, has it? And also never in the UK have I realised why there is such a division. I mean, I've always worked in things like crime, victimology, poverty, all those things really matter to me. But never have I realised how completely disassociated most people are from that reality because they don't see it. You know, they've got a nice house or they've got a decent income or they've got an ordinary life, you know, where they don't really need to think about those things. But when you've seen it, you can't unsee it. So like all I do every day is I sit and I think about the catastrophes happening behind houses, you know, doors, closed doors, and people aren't seeing it. And then you put something out and then the biggest division is poor people don't have technology. This idea, and this is driving me mad because I put a tweet out a while ago about poverty and people were like, they're all spending it on alcohol and cigarettes. Everybody has a smartphone. Like, absolute bullshit. Like, it's not true. Everybody does not have a smartphone. More importantly, most children who are poor don't have any technology. And if you don't know that a decent internet connection is costing like 60 quid a lot of the times a month, then that 60 quid, you haven't got it to spend. You don't even have the electricity bills paid. You know, these are realities of people all over the UK now. Like 1 in 3 children live in poverty. But you put that out online and all you get is people telling you you're wrong. Not one poor person goes, yeah, I had one out of all of the people and she said, I'm a poor person living in a hostel. I've been given this phone because I've got a court case against my ex regarding violence. And I agree with what you said. One person who had technology. And then people had to go at her saying, well, you've got this kind of technology.
See, the problem is the poor people can't respond
Because they've not got the bloody...
poor, they don't have the fucking phone.
Right, right. So then, and what's happening? The government look on Twitter. The government look on Twitter for their views. They look on social media for their views. They look at little tests, like we'll put out this YouGov poll, what they say. The people who actually count aren't dealing with that reality because they're not responding because they don't know. And also, like, the students, what happened to students? If I'd have been 18 and locked up in my student hall, paying for it, mate, there'd have been a riot. Yeah. Like, I went to riots when I was, protests. Can we just caveat that? When I say riots, I mean protests. I went to protests when I was a kid, and I'll take my boys because that's what they've got to see. They've got to see that, the common working person wants a better country than we're getting now. We want democracy. We want freedom.
So detached from like working class. Like I'm from working class background, and you see them on telly, and the thing that winds me up, they all talk like that with the thumb and the finger in there. I don't know why that winds me up when they're talking. It's just so annoying. Yeah. Matt Hancock does it. It must be like a Tory thing. They go like that. This is what we need to do, and you think you're so far away from what the world's thinking.
Johnson's the worst for doing that. Like,
I think the vote in that show that way, like people like if you look online, they're definitely going to win, and they never win because not everyone online is putting their opinion on. The silent majority of people, just
I am surprised
anything.
that Tories got in though.
I don't know. I think it was one of them with Corbyn. A lot of people didn't like Corbyn, didn't they? And some did, and I don't know.
But like some of the areas that would usually have been completely red, going blue.
Well, you only have to look at like up in Cumbria, what was it called, the Workington Man or something like that, like that your man Farage, that he was up there campaigning for. But and going back to the COVID thing. I can't see this. I can't see it changing at all. Like this appears to be the new normal.
Oh God, it's just terrifying. Do you not think it's just terrifying?
Imagine being 19 now and going for nights out, and you've got to be home by 9:30. You're not allowed to meet someone who you don't know. You're like, well, how long are we doing this for? Like 10 year, 20 year? Like that average age of a person living in a care home's 9 months. And when this is over, that means it's a year. That means it would have potentially have just died anyway. So I think if you ask a 9-year-old, do you want to come and see your grandkids once a week, take that chance, we'll do wash hands and stuff like that, I think every one of them would say yes.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest, my mum has stage 3 COPD, so she isolated for
my niece did this
10 weeks. And then in the end, she just rang my sister up and said, listen, because I've got a 2-year-old niece, and in the end she rang her up and she went, I don't care, like we'll take the chance. Okay, just rub a little bit of like stuff like the sanitizer on her hands. Bring her around. I'll wear a mask. Just bring her around. Within 5 minutes, she had the mask off, and it's like it's too difficult.
And that brings life, though. That's what creates life. Humans need each other. We're 98.8% connected to our primate cousins, the chimpanzee, and all they do all day is play with each other and feel each other and get with each other and just have fun with each other. And like, what are we doing? Well, social isolation up until literally this year was known by the NHS as probably the biggest indicator for a lesser life, like a life of less years, a life of less joy, a life of more disease. It kills you. But now it's normal. And then physical interactions on a human basis every single day, seeing your face, watching the way that you are and interacting with you because you're talking to me, that gives you a long life too. It's more important than diet. What are we suddenly changing? All of our research. This is what blows my mind more than anything. To me, it appears that we have all this research that very evidentially tells us what makes us healthy and gives us a better life. And yet this year we've decided that none of it has any meaning. In fact, every single report up until us going into lockdown with masks said that masks were useless in this kind of...
And September, WHO's guidelines on a pandemic wasn't a lockdown. No one had ever heard of a lockdown before China done it. So like they've gone past what the dole said and the mask thing. Like the mask, I don't mind wearing a mask. I wear one because you're meant to wear one. But I would like to see a study saying, oh, this is why we're wearing it because we've done this. But you can see clips of the government telling you don't wear a mask, doesn't make a difference. Give it 2 months when no one's getting it. Wear a mask. You're like, did you do any studies? No, just get on with it. Do you know what I mean?
They rushed through some studies that have been picked apart. And that's the thing as well. The other thing that I think has become very clear is they'll say to you, you can't have an opinion unless you're an epidemiologist or a virologist. Like, when did that happen? When did having to have a qualification in that kind of disease control mean that you couldn't have an opinion on what you're seeing around you, you know, or the fact that the statistics are there. You know, I follow the statistics guy who's amazing on Twitter, and it's just real. It's just the ONS stuff, but extrapolated in a way that makes sense for you. And how can anybody look at it and think this is acceptable? But we are doing. I think what's really scary for me is it's all about I think that the government are just doing some kind of incompetent damage control on the reputation. I think that they know that the disease isn't as virulent as China made out, and we have to ask ourselves, why did they do that? But we knee-jerked and did what we did. But it isn't as virulent as they said regarding damage, as in we're not all going to die, and it's very age-specific. And even though people say it's vulnerability-specific, it's still majorly age-specific, much like brain hemorrhages tend not to, affect young children, but it will happen occasionally, right? So there's always vulnerabilities, like a child playing football will die of a heart attack. There's always vulnerabilities. So even if it's massively aged demographic killing those individuals, and only a small percentage of them, there will be people who die who shouldn't, because that's the way it works. That's the way it's always worked. Death isn't very fair sometimes. But to know that, and then to start talking about mandated vaccine, when we've gone from deaths, which you understand we all want to know about the deaths, to cases, to asymptomatic cases, and we're counting people who have an immunity, that means. So you've got an immunity that works. So you're asymptomatic, it's recognised an old cold or whatever, and it's fought it perfectly without you even knowing. How is that something we need to know? And they'll say, well, because they can pass it on. But then we need to test everybody for every single illness every single day, because influenza can kill you, or a really bad case of a bug that you could catch, could kill you. Things can kill you. So are we going to go around saying, well, oh, you're asymptomatic for influenza, you're asymptomatic for a stomach bug that you're carrying, you don't notice it, but it's there, and if you touch something, somebody else could get it, all those kind of things. Why are we doing this? And it can only be because they need to prove a narrative, and the narrative is this was very dangerous, we've saved you from it. And because it's now getting to a point where it's quite clear that they haven't saved us from it because we don't really need saving from it, they're now saying a vaccine, let's get it through quickly, so that people can't by next year wake up and go, well, that didn't really happen, so I probably don't need a vaccine. So when you have that being stage managed, I think that surprises me that people don't just see how obvious that looks.
It's the same with the technology thing as well. Some bars you go to, you can only get in if you've got that
track and trace.
Track and trace on the app and that. But I joked, I put it on Twitter about my dad's Nokia. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I don't know how
true.
he's meant, he can't even send a text.
Exactly.
So does that mean he can't go to a restaurant?
My dad would have been the same.
Yeah, what are them sort of people meant to do if they can't get in bars? And even I don't have it on my phone because I refuse to do stuff like, I hate things like that. And I just thought, my dad couldn't come in here, couldn't go in that restaurant, especially in the bigger cities, the town we're from.
Yeah.
I think COVID's your least he worries in Cumbria. But if he come to a city, he wouldn't like the prices for starters, so that would put him off. But he wouldn't be able to get into actually about 50% of the bars.
But I wouldn't go to those bars anyway, because I think it's about data.
Yeah.
I work in tech. I've been building an app for years, and we kind of pride ourselves on the fact that we're not going to be taking people's data in that way. We're not selling people's data. But if you think about, you've got Google, you've got Facebook. If we take those two massive ones, they pretty much know what you need before you even think you need it. Add to that now somebody's movements all the time with an acknowledged data app where I can see where you go, what you spend. And that's just in bars now. Will it be in shops in the end? And if that's the case, can I check out all your habits? And then what can I do with that and sell that? That's something that I'm assuming will probably happen, because an app's not really worth anything unless you've either got things that you can make sales over or things that you can sell data-wise. So I just wouldn't buy into it because of the fact that I don't think that it's fit for purpose. I don't think it's really going to do anything. I don't need to.
It's not needed, is it really?
What if I went into 5 different places in 5 different times, and every time I came into somebody who was asymptomatic with COVID? Do I then have to isolate forever? What happens if you're bad luck? There's a chance, isn't there, that every few weeks you could be getting stay in. I don't get it.
It'd be better having an app for something dangerous, like a paedophile. Or something like that. That would be better. Just saying
that would be you were within 15 feet of a paedophile, and
then obviously you'd be guessing who it was and stuff like a terrible thing. But
I might buy into that one.
I'd be more on board with something like that. But like you said, than someone having the flu, coming into a cinema that I might think, oh my god, who in here's got COVID? Oh, she sneezed like that and hit the deck. And I just think you create more and more panic that way. And get an app for some of these, like an ex-murderer, or something like that, or childhood.
I like that. Yeah, that's a great idea. You should definitely do that. You should sell that one. How close are you to a paedophile app?
Maybe not time and name.
Do you know what I mean? The worrying thing is when you see loads of red dots and you realise how profoundly massive paedophilia is. You know what I mean? That would be really scary.
I had a job for the council once, and we were working with I think there was a community trust officer, something job they'd made up. And we were taking the kids round knocking on doors to get money for the thing. And they went, "Oh, John, there's these doors you can't knock on. This is an estate. The youth club's right in the middle of this estate." But honest to God, there was about 14 doors in this small thing you couldn't knock on. I was like, "Oh, why? Oh, well, they've done child abuse. They've done this." And you're like, "Oh my God." Like that, like it's hard though, because I'm an idiot, not to get drunk and just name them. Do you know what I mean? Like you're just like, "Oh, pedo," you know, like you just think, I don't know. It's surprising. And especially in like the Lakes area in West Cumbria, I think they move a lot of them from cities to different areas, don't
they
they?
do.
And I don't know, it's just a bizarre... I didn't realise how much of a problem that is.
Yeah.
And I talked to Chris Thrall about it, a Marine guy, and he was saying it's so bizarre when you look at jail terms for some of these crimes that people are getting. You know, like, if you... is it £1,000 for if you have so many people in your house for a barbecue?
Yeah.
More than
But
six.
I'm sure if you download so many images for a child, it's like 500 quid, isn't it? And you're like, I'd rather that was like 50 grand or £1 million than someone just having a barbecue with grandma.
Well, a middle-class lad, excuse me, a middle-class boy got didn't even get a trail sentence, and he'd got some of the most graphic images of child abuse, and he was distributing it, and it was like really, really serious grade. And he was middle class and came from a good family, so obviously they're not a threat, are they? And it's the same actually when you look at working class sentences versus middle class sentences. It's always the working class sentences that are much stronger. We have a very skewed perception. So you'll remember that girl who stabbed her boyfriend, but she was a medical doctor trainee and she was pretty, and we shouldn't ruin the future of somebody who stabbed her boyfriend. You know, that should be completely acceptable, so that she didn't get a sentence that reflected the crime. There's that, as like going back to the beginning, if it looks good, it must be good, right? That person couldn't possibly do that. And that's the problem. And the thing about paedophilia is, again, they've done some studies recently, and I was really like avidly watching this program in America about the fact that they believe that there could be a problem of wiring in the brain. So the area of protection that you and I get for a child. So when I see a child, I just want to kind of protect it, and I have a really strong compulsion to do that, even if it's not my child. That's like what we'd expect for a healthy human brain, because you're meant to protect the vulnerable. Same as if I saw somebody who was old and fell over in the street. I just want to go and make sure they're okay. I want to protect the vulnerable. But they believe that that area, particularly when it comes down to protecting children, can be wired wrong, and it can go to sexual experience. So you get turned on instead of a necessity of protecting, which kind of makes you feel equally sorry for people who are paedophiles, because there are virtuous paedophiles who do not go anywhere near child porn, acknowledge that it's completely reprehensible to touch a child, and do not go near children. They are groups of people called virtuous paedophiles. And there's a disparity between what a paedophile is and a child molester. A paedophile is somebody with a predilection who feels it, and a child molester is somebody who acts on it, whether that's vicariously through watching material or whether it is in harming a child directly. So you can be a paedophile and never ever touch a child. And actually that seems to be a growing online presence where they're talking about supporting each other. And in Germany, they advertise paedophile help forums and help centres and therapy on their big shows like X Factor in between those shows. So they say, you know, this isn't something that we appreciate you want to have, but please get help with us because we know that we can help you. So it's that we do badly. What we make paedophiles feel in the UK, and rightfully so in some of the circumstances, is you are reprehensible, you're worse than killers. That's what they always say, you know. Yeah. It's what you're worth, you know, you abused somebody, they only killed somebody, but it's that's because of that brain wiring. We're like, how could you do that? How could you dream of touching that child? So that's how evocative it is. But we actually don't therefore give license to help a lot of people, because if the paedophile knows I have a predilection for children, and then they go to the doctors, what reaction will they get? Will it be empathic? Will it be, I understand? Or will it be, I'm going to speak to the police? And then suddenly you've not even done anything, but you've got the police coming around and then they don't treat you very nicely, understandably, because they've got that reaction. Can you see how that works? Yeah. So the problem is we do have a massive problem with paedophiles in the UK, and we're not going to get anywhere unless we figure out what's the best way of treating them. And when we are incarcerating the more serious ones, what do we do with them to bring them to a position where they don't offend again? Because it's hard, isn't it, to have a predilection and not act on it unless you've been given the resources and strategies to prevent you from doing that.
What's the percentage? It's a very high percentage, isn't it, of paedophiles that were actually sexually abused themselves as children. Yeah.
But the way it goes is, the majority of paedophiles will have been sexually molested themselves, but the majority of people sexually molested would be absolutely abhorrently against being a paedophile. Yeah. So you might have been abused, but actually, arguably, it probably says that you've bought into that narrative at some point, fair enough, and that's twisted the way that you want to own your own sexuality. But I don't think that it's because you were abused that makes you the paedophile. I think it's still choice-based in that respect. And I think that most people who have ever been sexually abused, like, they are totally offended by the idea of people thinking that if they've been sexually abused, they might become a paedophile. I think it's probably more likely that instinctually those who choose to carry on abusing after they've been abused themselves had a similar predilection to the paedophiles themselves, if that makes sense. I guess if you abuse quite a lot of people, in the end, you'll abuse people who are going to be paedophiles. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's just a weird one, because outsiders looking in, you don't have a clue. It's like bad, good sort of thing. And it's the same with the Jeffrey Epstein. When you watch that and you think, oh, all the terrible stuff he done, you're like, oh, what did he get? House arrest. You're like, really? Is that what he got?
Yeah, but don't you think, again, like, this is, again, just me on my rabbit hole ideas. So I do appreciate this will sound a little bit out there, but this is what I spend a lot of time doing. I like to sit and think about what could be going on. So I've worked in sexual exploitation. So I've worked with young girls who were sexually trafficked, and I cannot describe the agony they were in. I can't even begin to describe what they went through. It makes Jeffrey Epstein's experience look like the best holiday you could ever have. Now, I know those girls suffered, and I know those girls absolutely were sex trafficked, right? And they deserve every empathy. It's awful. But why have they focused so heavily on this island and more the glamour of what they got up to? And, oh yeah, they were abused too. But look at this amazing island, and look at these cars, and look at these, well, they were abused too. And look at them in the bikinis by the pool and having a great time. They were abused too. It's very quiet for me, the bit about the abuse. It's very much focused on, look at this incredible wealth and what they were getting up to whilst they were also abused. Like, that to me whitewashes abuse. It actually, sexual abuse shouldn't be focusing on anything other than the predilections of these people for this awful crime and the abuse that they suffered, you know, the horrible abuse. But it feels like there's almost a Hollywood version of it, a more palatable version. So when people are looking in and going, oh, Epstein was a monster, they're also able to go, but it's not quite as bad as I imagined. You know, sex trafficking isn't quite as bad. You know, Prince Andrew isn't quite as bad, because it doesn't look that bad, does it? As opposed to what's really going on, which is young girls being horrendously molested and used by wealthy men in that circumstance, which also translates to sex trafficking in the UK, which is massive, where girls, particularly in the care sector, have been horrifically abused. Those kind of things happen every day. But I think that there's almost a willingness with that Epstein narrative to go, oh, it happens to rich people too, but also if you don't really want to believe it's that bad, you can look at that, can you? You know what I mean? I know that it was bad, by the way. I appreciate it was fully bad. But imagine what that also does for people, because you know and I know that some of the people watching those documentaries will be going, those girls asked for it.
Yeah,
those girls took all that benefit. Those girls, that's the one thing we need to avoid, is ever having people left with those questions. Because if I showed you the documentaries that could be made, but they won't because it's too disturbing for people, not one person would watch it and go, they asked for that. They wanted that. They went there of their own volition. You wouldn't.
Who's the worst person that you've investigated or looked into, like out the murders and things? Who's, well, not worse, who's the one that's fascinated you the most? Who's been a bit of an anomaly sort of thing you've looked at and you thought, I just can't work that out, or why he did that and why he's
I think Chris Watts is a really interesting one, because I wouldn't in a million of years, like you said, have predicted that somebody like him would have done it. And I think he's going to be almost like the new breed of psychopath. So remember that we weren't very emotionally literate and cogent, were we? I mean, like, we weren't the most illiterate and cogent community. So emotion vocabulary, we didn't really use it always in the last decades that before, you know, we've become very emotionally literate. So I suppose that psychopaths are growing in their ability to be more emotionally literate too. So people who might have struggled to mask, maybe mask better now, particularly in the States where they all talk about things. So I guess that interests me. I mean, the stalwarts, you know, Nielsen, Dahmer, they interest
the Nielsen
me.
one was on ITV, wasn't it?
I've not seen that, but
he's such a bizarre guy, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And that's before the internet and things like that. Do you think you could get away with that now? Because the internet would be like, oh, guys gone missing, everyone would know. Like Ted Bundy was gone different parts of the country, no one knew. Do you think we'll ever have another type of Ted Bundy that can go that far with the internet cameras and things like that? Do you think it's closed it in a little bit more than
I think that it's who you choose to kill.
Right.
It will always be. Thousands and thousands of people disappear every year with no trace. So is it necessarily that you choose the wrong people? Like, we know that, for example, in America, if you choose prostitutes, you're a lot more likely to get away with it. People in society have these ridiculous realms of who's expendable and who isn't. So people will say, well, if you put yourself at risk, do we pay that much attention? We even call women prostitutes because then we disassociate ourselves with the fact that she's a woman or a mother and she's actually been murdered horribly. We say she's a prostitute or a sex worker. But actually, you know, if I died, they wouldn't go, she was a psychologist. It'd be Emma Kenny, mother of whatever. You know, you'd humanize me. We dehumanize people because it makes it more palatable to imagine that they are expendable. So I think that it will still happen. I don't know where it will happen and how often it will happen to the type of person that we've seen in the past, like, you know, mums walking home from the school run or people getting killed in the middle of the night in their homes, because I think that, yeah, killers definitely get more right regarding the right kind of people to kill. But if you have a compulsion and a desire, it's worth doing it. That's the other thing. There is a misconception about wanting to kill versus being willing to take the punishment. Like, that's not how it works. Like Joanna Danahay, you know, it wasn't that she wanted not to go to prison. It was that she definitely wanted to kill. And if it came as if it came as a reality for that prison sentence, then it's worth it. I think that, like, if you imagine being like so compelled to kill a child that it obsesses you every single day, and all you think about it when you masturbate or when you're sexually connected with people is children having sex with child and killing him, and that compulsion becomes like enormous, and then you go out and you do it and it's everything you ever dreamt of, and maybe you'll get to do it again, it's everything you ever dreamt of, and then you get arrested. Well, you've done it, haven't you? You've got everything you ever dreamt of, and now you can live on that for the rest of your life. You can remember that. You can take yourself back to that moment. That's why mementos are collected by a lot of people. It anchors you to that situation. So the punishment is almost worth it, I think, for some killers. So I think it'll always happen.
The bit I've never understood is, you see, like, just say Ted Bundy got arrested or Ramirez and people like that. The women that fancy them people.
Oh, because, God, like, don't even start.
There's like in bad boys, you know, like the guy out of Piggy Blinders, a bit of a bad boy, or someone who's... But there's bad boys, and then there's just taking the piss, isn't it? Like Ted Bundy and people like that. Like, you're getting into that relationship, it's not going to end well. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, there's some evidence that you might have a little bit of a few problems in there. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. 100%.
I think I can change him. Yeah. I can change him. I'll mother him. He just needs a good mothering.
That is exactly the way it works. Yeah. Like, you know, it's like the woman wanting a bad boy done good situation on crack, isn't it? You know, like, well, all I need to do, I'll be the difference, you know, and they'll be your last thoughts as you're having your head chopped off by them. Yeah. I think that the fact that people are incarcerated for a very long time, for some women who might have had issues in their lives, the idea of never being able to, you know, be with them physically is protective on one level, but having their relationship, which means that they're never going to get out, so they don't ever have to worry about them cheating. Those are ways that make women feel empathic, but I don't get it. I mean, I would run for the hills if, you know, it wouldn't matter whether you were the richest man in the world. If you were a psychopath just because you were running an industry and you happen to have that mindset, you wouldn't want to be with that person because your life just wouldn't be nice. So I don't get women who do that either. I really don't.
Yeah, but I can only imagine it's certain type. I can't imagine Harold Shipman was getting much like fan mail in prison.
He didn't wait long enough. Harold.
No, true. But I don't know whether a lot of it's the American thing. There seems to be something like quite sexy about the Ted Bundy, like and something dark and mysterious. Whereas when you're going in and you're putting an injection in a 79-year-old. There's nothing as sexy about that as it.
I don't know. There's a few of them. They've all got offers, haven't they? Like the Manson guy. You wouldn't exactly say he was a Calvin Klein.
No,
but he's about that big as well. He's got a thing on his head. But they're still getting the offers, and he had a little cult with him, didn't he? All the young women, they all fancied him. So there is some of that people are drawn to.
Charisma a lot of the time. Those kind of charisma. Yeah, but I mean, I think there were a lot of drugs involved as well where Manson was younger and stuff. I think there was like almost he believed all that stuff that he was saying. And that little group of women who now some of them want to be let out of prison because they say that they've realised their ways and they're sorry and all of that. And obviously in America, it's very unforgiving. But I do kind of think that you'll always find attraction where there is darkness. Like, just think about BDSM. You know, for most people, BDSM as a sexual predilection isn't something that they'd really like to be into very heavily. You know, a bit of spanking, but not maybe the nipple clamps and being hung from a ceiling. But for some people, that's definitely the thing, right?
Yeah.
So there are always people who are attracted to a little bit more of a darker narrative. And so I think that those women, definitely that's their attraction level. They're just like, oh, it'll be different with me, as you said, and it'll be fine. I'll be able to reform him and he'd never kill me. That would be the language. It wouldn't be, he isn't a serial killer. It would be, well, he'd never kill me because I'm different. And actually, you know, to some degree, look at people, you know, people do have relationships. There are many serial killers who had great marriages, but they'll just go and kill your friend.
Well, it's worse the ones that know the partner's a serial killer as well.
Oh,
like Myra Hindley, people like, not Myra Hindley, I can't think the Moors.
Myra knew that, yeah, Myra Hindley,
Yeah, the Moors murders.
Oh,
so,
God.
like, if he was buttering the bread, you'd be thinking, is he going to cut my head up? You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
like, why do they not think along them? Or do they just think, oh, I'll be fine?
I think as well that, one of the things that you get with the Hindley and Brady is like, we still want to do that forgiving because she's female and say that she was led by him. But I mean, like, my husband could come in tonight and be like, Emma, I've just got this desire to go murder a child. Will you come with me? I wouldn't be like, yeah, I'll just get my coat. You know what I mean? By the way, if you could, they trust women more than they trust mates. So could you like act like you just want to give them a lift home before I kill them? Yeah, of course. You know, I've got the sweets. Yeah. It's so evil because I judge her equally, but probably, if I'm honest, more harshly than him, because I see a woman as being instinctually programmed by society that has a very clear stereotype about us being nurturing. So you kind of want to be nurturing to just act out a stereotype. But I think inherently as a mother, you know, you activate these feelings of trust and protection for children. That's the folie à deux, isn't it, with those two? But the point is for her to actively go and record those poor kids, to have sex in the area where they killed and buried. You know, this isn't at all acceptable. She wanted out. And that's the other thing. The arrogance of her willingness to actually think that she deserved to be set free. That blew my mind. As a child, I can remember as a child, my parents used to talk about this. I burst into tears as a child in a car because I had this idea that Myra Hindley was going to ask for her freedom. I was a kid. I must have read something. And indeed that started happening. And it would send me into like a cold sweat. This idea that this woman who had like actively slayed children, I mean, in the most horrific ways, had no regard for the parents or the life or the sanctity of any of that. And then she wanted to get out because she'd changed. You know, I'm really sorry. You don't get to change. Like Rose West, you don't get to change, you know. You don't get to change. It's too late. Unless you can clone and reinvent and regenerate those children and bring them all back, you don't get to change.
What about that couple I'm sure it's Canada, a blonde woman and her husband, they were quite young, and I think he gave her little sister for like a Christmas present, and I think they did stuff to her and she died, and she's out now, isn't she? And I seen something in the paper about they don't want her at parents' evenings and things like that. And
I mean,
totally and it wasn't just one person. Like he went through raping and killing a lot of people, and she knew about it, this video of the thing, and they were saying, oh, we don't know whether she'd be at parents' evening or kids club. And you're like, she shouldn't. Do you know what I mean?
She shouldn't be near children.
No, that's what I mean.
That's just it. You know, how do you have a right to do that? That's the thing. I always think that in life there must be consequences. But I believe in reparation. I believe in restoration. I believe most criminals can be absolutely looked after and brought back to a position of healing. And I think that our system doesn't do enough of that. When you look at places like Sweden, it's got a much better record. But I also think there are some crimes where we just can never take a risk. So if you've like raped, molested and killed a baby, or, you know, as people have, or a young toddler or a woman or whatever, I don't think you're allowed out. It's not because I don't believe you when you say I am absolutely reformed. I believe that you believe that, and indeed you may be. But I'm afraid I have to make a choice, and that choice is I can't be sure. So if I can't be sure, I'm going to have to keep you inside to protect those who might befall your aggression outside. It doesn't mean they haven't reformed. It means that the cost, risk, benefit analysis has got to be on the side of victims. And I think it's rare that you're in a situation like that. So when we've said domestic homicide and a guy's killed a woman in a fit of rage and then serves 12 years and then gets out and does it again, then surely that means that we hadn't done the work, and he definitely shouldn't have been walking the streets. So he should, if he's going to go back again, go back for life. Let's not then take another risk. And we have seen it, that people have got out and then killed again. So the risks weren't dealt with effectively. And then we've seen people kept in for life because of arson, when they didn't actually kill anybody. And like you said, the topsy-turvy nature of who gets sent down for what and for how long is consuming and really upsetting for me, because if you've killed a child, if you've raped and murdered a child, then I don't think you can ever be safe.
Where do you stand? Because I think me and John have different opinions. Where do you stand on the death penalty?
Oh, no, I wouldn't kill.
No.
I understand why.
Yeah.
I understand why people would.
Yeah. No, see, I wouldn't kill for whatever anyone's ever. I know that you would kill paedophiles.
Where's this come from? Paedophiles.
I know that's the most typical.
I know.
But that's coming from that place
because
of
it's so
protection.
because it's so emotional. Because you go, well, and the one argument
But
people always
would
throw
you,
in is if someone ever hurt my niece, well, I'd take an axe to them.
Right.
And then people go, so it's okay for you to kill. No, because I would do that knowing that I was gonna, there's a good chance I could spend the rest of my life in jail. I wouldn't expect a medal of valor for it, so. But I just wanted to know from the psychological point of view, what your point.
I think that what you're talking about there, though, is why they don't allow us to make those choices, isn't it? Exactly that reason, because most of us would kill if we were put in a position of feeling it uniquely. So every parent of a child who's been murdered, most would want to kill in those initial stages the person who'd done it. They might not 5 years down the line, I've seen that, people initially want to murder somebody because they've done something awful to the family, but 5 years down the line, they wouldn't want to. So the reason that the law takes it out of our hands is because of that fire. But the main reason that I wouldn't bring the death penalty is because we get it wrong. We get it wrong. Yeah. And then on top of getting it wrong, it means that there's no hope of people healing. And where child rapists and murderers are concerned, I don't think you can. I don't think you can heal them. But then I don't think that they should be treated differently to somebody who's maybe murdered an old lady in a robbery. So it would be arguable that, well, that's a life, so therefore let's kill the person who murdered the old lady in a robbery, even though it's a completely different set of circumstances. You have to have that's life and that's death. And actually, I think we get it wrong. I think that every instance of death is different. And also, I think that when it comes down to child molestation and murder, most of us would just agree that every single one had to just be snuffed out of the existence, because we'd feel so moved by those scenarios. So I'm kind of glad we don't have the death penalty, because I also don't think that any human's got a right to justly kill. Does that make sense? Yeah. Even though I know, as you said, I would absolutely kill for my children, but I know it wouldn't be just. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying? We'd take the punishment.
But the thing about essentially what it does as well, though, if it changes, if you've got a paedophile and he molests a child, if he knows that if he's found out that he's going to be put to death, it then puts that thing in the mind of, well, I've got a better chance of getting away with this if I kill the child. So it changes the parameters of what they know they can get away with and what they can't. Stuff like that. So.
I don't understand just killing. I don't understand kind of anybody wanting to be there to watch somebody else die, even if that person's done horrible things. I just don't know what this life is about, and I'm not chancing anything that it's something that could be, if I encourage death, that then I'm part and privy to it. Yeah. Having said that, like I said, if somebody walked in now and tried to attack us all with a gun, I'd probably try to get it off them as you would, and either make them injure them to a point where they couldn't hurt us, or stop them being able to do anything. And I think that you're in those scenarios, aren't you? There's always like a boundary. I always think everyone's got the potential to kill.
I'll tell you right now, if that happened, John would use me as a human shield.
You've got more chance of getting that gun off than the universe. Well, they've got people rehabilitated. What about people like Charles Bronson? Because he's been in jail for I don't know how many years.
Isn't he coming out soon?
Well, that's what that's a big debate.
He always seems to be coming out, doesn't he? But
I think he's coming out soon. I think that he needs his own documentary series and fly on the wall when he's out. That's what I think, if I'm really honest. He's such a character. I think that what he did because he thought he was justly acting in certain ways, and then the rest of the time it's just been about attention. I think that he is definitely dangerous, but I also think he's older, and we know that statistically men who are older become a lot less problematic on his behaviours. They get bored of crime, they get bored of doing those kind of things, and I think he'd be under such a strong licence that it would almost make sense for him to be freed. I don't know. I think that the law is a problem when they use one set of circumstances for one person and give them parole, and then one set of circumstances for another and don't. But who would want to be the parole officer who lets somebody out who's killed before, and then he goes and does something crazy?
He'd be on every celebrity program. I'm a Celebrity, get me out me, Charles Bronson, Jim McCauley, like how mixed
I'd
up
go with that one.
stuff like if he
I'd
was on
probably
anything.
be really good mates with him by the end of it.
That's what I mean. Like if he was on them celebrity, it'd just mix it up, wouldn't it? You know what I mean? It'd just have Only Way is Essex, Charles Bronson, just
Strictly Come
It'd be
Dancing.
amazing.
Strictly Come Dancing.
He'd win.
Yeah,
because
just
all
getting
those
tens
women
all the
that you're
time.
talking about would be like, he's a great guy, let's vote for him, forget murder. People are very forgiving sometimes of certain people. So there's also people who have killed people who are bad people, and they've kind of been considered just killers by the public. So I've forgotten one of the names. I worked on a case where he had basically only killed paedophiles, and people were like, oh, he only killed paedophiles. And you're like, but it's not just the fact that you think a paedophile got killed so you protected a child. Number one, paedophiles aren't often molesting children. Like actually a lot of paedophiles just might have predilections, but let's take the cases that they were known to have been problematic in their behaviour. Like they still have family members. There are like still an onslaught of chaos created by the murder of somebody. And yeah, it was almost like he's quite held as a hero. He's quite iconic because he murdered people who were bad. Like somehow that's okay to murder people who are bad. Like murder isn't bad, you know, it's okay in certain circumstances. So I do think we've got a real morality issue with our understanding of, So I do think we've got a real morality issue with the way that we treat crime per se and our views on it. Yeah.
It's so bizarre though, isn't it? It's I don't, when you just look at like the jail terms and stuff like that, for people looking in, it just doesn't seem to make that much sense. The system, you just think, oh, how come they're only getting that? And same person's done similar, he's getting 10 times as much. And obviously, you'll know more because you're in it a bit more, but from the outside, it just seems a bit unjust.
No, I think that that's why so many people are spending their life on appeal, because there'll be evidences. And also, what is wrong with our crime system? This is wrong with our crime system. So if you've got a girl who's been sex trafficked, she could have 18 barristers questioning her in front of a jury, literally ripping her apart, like telling her that she deserved it, telling her that she asked for it. This 13-year-olds. How is it that we even have a system where a 13-year-old child who cannot legally consent to sex has been sex trafficked around hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of men, persistently, consistently for years? It gets to court, and the defense for the people who are being defended is she wanted it, she went there, she asked for it, and that's allowed. How is there even a defense allowed? There shouldn't be a defense. It's statutory rape, as is in the defined reasoning behind that and the classification in law, but I can have 18 different barristers tell you that you're a slag. Because that's what they do. They might not say it, but everyone knows what the intonation is. And you know what? They're clever and they're good at doing it. And they exhaust the victim. They make the victim seem like they aren't necessarily able to express themselves in a way that seems logical because it doesn't feel logical. And then if they can do the best, they make them seem unstable. And if they can make them seem unstable, you can't really be an appropriate witness. So our law is about making a pantomime of some of the most serious issues. And if you can do that, you can do the one thing. Because remember, the prosecution have to prove that there is no doubt, whereas the defense only need to suggest that there is a little element of doubt. That's it. It's not about whether you believe or not. I believe 75% that it happened. Well, you're going to have to go not guilty. And that's the way it works.
Can't finish on a child sex trial. That's one we can't finish on. That can't be that subject to finish off with. Moving forward with the corona crack, that's how I started seeing you work. What do you hope that happens now with the government? If what would you say we need to do? Quick sort of thing.
I would like the government to completely ease restrictions, give people choice to go back to their normal lives, allow people to not wear masks, and if people really do need to shield, as in the doctors say they absolutely should, then they should be paid well for that and protected, but they should still not be told that they have to. What are we going to do otherwise? I mean, you've got Sturgeon, who, honestly, the amount of pictures I have in my head of her in different uniforms, she's talking about a zero COVID policy. But that's ridiculous because it's going to come back every year.
Yeah.
We already know that. We've got on our level people talking about vaccines potentially being mandated. Well, this is my body. It's not your body. I want 20 years before I have that vaccine, please. So I can actually reflect on the research and see that there's no injury. That's sensible. That's not inflammatory. I want protection of poverty. We had so many people really poor in the UK anyway. And now we're going to have miles more. We've got mass unemployment coming, an economic downpour of like 20% GDP, which means that world poverty is going to escalate and we won't be able to give the aid that we sorely need to do. These are things that like are happening now because of this result. I want the focus to be on reality, not on a pantomime that's stage managed by the government. The government's stage managing it. It goes one of two things. We either go down the rabbit hole, right? We either go down the rabbit hole, which I don't want to. The rabbit hole says that Gates wants to vaccinate everybody in the world. He'll make £780 billion and it's all about kind of control. I don't believe that. I don't. I mean, it sounds interesting and I can kind of understand why people put 2 and 2 together and maybe get 6. But for me, it's not anything to do. I mean, look, we can't even organise track and trace. I mean, the idea that there's some, I'm not saying that people are wrong, right? Because I don't know. Who knows? There might be a world order behind this. I don't know. But if there is, they've come to England and they've really got it wrong on the competence of our government to manage it because everything they do is ridiculous. Everything they do is ridiculous. So I personally, unless they're stage managing, looking incompetent so that they can then do this thing to make it look I don't know. I don't believe that. I kind of think it began with Boris Johnson going, let's do Swedish model. He got a lot of pressure and he knee-jerked, went into lockdown. Too late. Out of control then for a while, as we'd expect with this situation. Then masks were brought in, even though that didn't make sense at that point, even though cases were going down at this point as far as deaths. And then on top of that, they started to ask us to walk in one-way systems because viruses are very good at knowing that. The one thing that you will know is if you are walking in a one-way system, you will never get sick.
It's got a time schedule as
Absolutely.
well. Absolutely.
The time schedule is sometimes it gets confused, I'm not going to lie, because it doesn't know which area is doing like this particular. I'm not allowed, for example, like even now, probably won't want to put it in, but even now we're breaking the law because I'm in Bury. So Bury is that basically we're in lockdown, but I'm working, so arguably you can come because it's work, right?
Yeah.
But you can't if you're my mum.
Which is the same with work parties, isn't it?
What does this mean?
You can go to work with 30 lads, but you couldn't go and have a Christmas dinner this year.
It's ridiculous.
That'll be the rules.
But he's thinking about lifting that because it doesn't work on Christmas Day. Everyone has a holiday. No. Like, I'm not taking the mick out of people who've died. This has happened. It's awful. Yeah. But these people are sick and it's awful. But we also need to think about how that sickness is going to play out through poverty and famine in the world, how it's going to affect our healthcare services, how it's going to affect cancer services per se, all of those things that we see with stillbirth that are going up. I think that the government have the information. Now, they didn't. I had every empathy and sympathy at the beginning, didn't you? I thought, wow, this is a bit weird, but 3 weeks doesn't seem too bad. And if that's going to save loads of lives, but mostly the NHS, then let's do that. And then it never stopped. But the NHS managed everything. And, my brain sometimes goes to that point of why did they build those massive hospitals? Why? And then I'm like, all right, well, maybe it is so the army can come in and give out all these vaccines because that would make sense, I guess. They'd need super centres to do that. But then I'm like, well, why would they have done that when they didn't necessarily know at the beginning? So maybe it is just that they built the hospitals because they thought there was going to be an overflow. And then I go, well, why don't we use those then for COVID patients? I don't understand. And then it comes back to, well, probably because the NHS is massively underfunded and they've been underfunded for years and the Tories have been talking about privatisation. And I hope to God that what this does is show that we need the NHS more than ever. I mean, as much as I might have spoken on Twitter, I think the NHS is one of the most incredible institutions that we've ever had. My grandma remembers, when she was a child, she's not here now, but my grandma, when she was a child, they used to have the doctor come around and collect the money because it didn't have a a public system of health. You used to pay a doctor. Like, think about that to the burden that we've already got. So I would hope that they'll get back to normal because we know what the science says now. At the beginning, we didn't, we do now. You don't need to be a virologist or a disease expert to see who it affects, why it affects them, and how we can prevent, ideally, that affecting them more. And then we don't need any experts to say that by closing the economy and capsizing us into the biggest economic recession ever, that it isn't going to therefore increase things like suicide, unemployment, poverty per se, a lack of aspiration, particularly in working in poorer classes, because they feel like they're marginalised and that they haven't got hope. It's going to probably create a massive, massive recession regarding houses, which means that, again, landlords will just pick up all the remnants of what was people's homes and lives. So I don't get it anymore. I think that's the problem I've got, right? I'm trying to figure out something that seems so obvious when the actual advice and guidance is thrown at it to make it feel unbelievably complex. But then when you actually analyse the data and the reality, it goes back to the first position. We know what to do. Why aren't we doing it?
Well, you just know if one of us three get COVID, it will be all over everywhere. Oh, they said about, look at them, he's dead now. And that seems to be the narrative in the world.
The poster boy for it. I've had it and I didn't even know. I've got antibodies. Didn't even know. Didn't even get sick.
Yeah.
But anyways, Emma, thanks for coming on.
Pleasure.
Thanks for giving us your time.
Thank you very, very much.
But, been dead interesting, so thanks a lot.
Oh my God, it's an absolute pleasure. Sorry that I hadn't even got out of bed properly by the time you arrived.
That's fine. That's fine. Don't worry about it.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Emma.